In the town of Dem, there lived a newly married couple named Samuel and Marianne who loved each other deeply. Before their marriage, Marianne's mother was against their relationship. She told Marianne that Samuel was not who he claimed to be, but Marianne stood her ground, insisting that Samuel was her choice and that she would marry him. After many arguments and back and forths between mother and daughter, Marianne's mother swore to disown her if she went ahead with the marriage. But Marianne ignored her mother and decided to marry Samuel because she was deeply in love with him. After her marriage to Samuel, her mother was heartbroken with anger and disowned Marianne. A few months after their wedding, something terrible happened that made the couple's finances difficult. A massive storm hit the town of Dem, destroying many homes and businesses. Samuel's business was among those affected. The storm destroyed everything he had, leaving him with absolutely nothing. He became poor and very depressed. There was almost no food or money to take care of himself and his wife, Marianne. He was devastated. One day, he sat down and thought about his life. He remembered an old friend named Fred, who had once told him about a distant city where it was easy to earn money and become rich. Samuel had previously dismissed the idea, but seeing how helpless and desperate he was, he decided to embark on the journey to that city. One evening, he called Marianne and told her, "There's nothing left for me in this village. There's no one to turn to for help, and we have nothing left to eat. I want to travel to a distant city to work and earn money for both of us. I promise you, I will return when I am rich and bring you with me. I promise." Marianne knew her husband was right, but she was not happy about the thought of being separated from him. During the early years of their marriage, she couldn't sleep that night. She stayed awake in bed, crying and sobbing, as she thought about what Samuel had said, that they had no one to turn to for help since her family had disowned her. So, she accepted Samuel's proposal. The next morning, Samuel sold all his valuable belongings to a very wealthy chief. He divided the money he received in half, giving one part to Marianne to take care of herself, and keeping the other half for his journey to the unknown city. Before leaving, he promised Marianne that he would always write to her to keep her updated on his progress. Samuel set off for the foreign city and arrived there in 5 days. The name of the city was Fiok, and compared to Dem, where Samuel came from, Fiok was a very developed city with many opportunities. It didn't take long for Samuel to find a job as a laborer for a very wealthy woman named Elena. His work involved washing her cars and cleaning her mansion. Elena was the only daughter of a very wealthy businessman who had suddenly fallen ill and passed away shortly after. After her father's death, Elena inherited all his wealth and became one of the richest women in Fiok. As soon as Samuel could, he wrote to Marianne to let her know that he had found a well-paying job. Samuel assured her that everything would be fine and begged her to be patient with him. Meanwhile, a certain merchant from Dem named Afrik had his eyes on Marianne. As soon as Samuel left for Fiok City, Afrik began pursuing Marianne, doing his best to win her heart. But Marianne insisted that she would remain faithful to Samuel. Samuel continued to work for Elena, and unlike the other employees, he was exceptional. He did his work with passion and vigor. Elena noticed how hard Samuel worked and invited him to dinner. Samuel accepted her invitation and went to her house that evening. When he arrived, there were all kinds of deliciously prepared dishes laid out on the dining table like a feast. Elena was wearing a very beautiful dress and was magnificently made up. When Samuel saw her, he was captivated by her beauty. Elena told him, "I've noticed how diligent you are compared to the other workers. I am impressed." Samuel smiled at her compliments. Then he replied, "Thank you very much, Miss Elena. I was raised to always do my best no matter what. I wish I had a man like you in my life." Elena said, "We both know I am single, and managing my father's empire can sometimes be a burden. Unlike most men in Fiok, who are lazy and cunning, you are quite different." Samuel was surprised by how direct she was. He immediately decided to take advantage of her vulnerability and become her husband. He moved closer to Elena and, to her great surprise, kissed her passionately. "I have always admired you, Miss Elena, but I felt I was beneath your class and didn't deserve you. I won't apologize for kissing you because you are so beautiful tonight. I couldn't help myself," Samuel said. Elena was astonished by Samuel's boldness, as kissing her was a daring move that could have cost him his job. But he did it anyway. Elena kissed him back and took him to her bedroom. After that night, Elena decided to marry Samuel because he had everything she needed in a man. However, Samuel hid from Elena the fact that he was already married. He pretended to be single and without a wife. After his marriage to Elena, Samuel stopped writing to Marianne. Marianne was devastated. She waited every month for a letter from her husband, but nothing came. This made Marianne so frustrated and sad that she barely smiled. She locked herself away and cried every day, becoming more and more depressed. "Is my husband dead? What could have happened to my beloved Samuel?" she wondered. While Marianne cried for her husband, Samuel was in the arms of another wealthy woman, enjoying his new life. He had completely forgotten about his wife, Marianne. After 6 years, Samuel and Elena had 3 beautiful children. Elena trusted Samuel so much that she gave him full responsibility for her father's business. Meanwhile, back in Samuel's village, Marianne was growing older. Over the years, many men approached her, but she refused their advances because of her love for Samuel. However, after 6 years, she could no longer hold on. She spoke with some friends, and they advised her to go to Fiok and search for Samuel. Marianne decided to go, but she had no money, and none of her friends could help her. So, she went to Eric, the wealthy merchant who had been bothering her for 4 years. She begged him to lend her money for the trip, but Eric insisted that she had to sleep with him before he would help. Marianne flatly refused his conditions, but because she was desperate to leave, Eric convinced her to have a drink with him. Marianne agreed, not knowing that Eric had slipped a sleeping pill into her cup. After finishing her drink, Marianne began to feel drowsy and ended up sleeping with Eric without realizing it. The next morning, she was filled with shame and regret for having taken the drink with Eric. But since the deed was already done, she decided to take the money he had promised her. The next day, she packed her clothes and set off for Fiok City to search for Samuel. She spent almost 6 days on the road, and when she arrived in Fiok, it didn't take her long to locate Samuel because she had his photo, and Samuel was already well known as the husband of the daughter of a wealthy and prominent businessman. When she found the mansion where Samuel lived with Elena, she knocked on the door, and Samuel answered. He was shocked to see her, and quickly took her to one of the guest rooms in the house. "What are you doing here? What do you mean by this?" "It's been almost 6 years," Samuel said. Marianne replied, "I have been patient, but you promised me you would return as soon as you had enough money for both of us." Marianne looked at Samuel in surprise because, during her journey, she had heard how rich Samuel had become after marrying the billionaire's daughter. So, how could he say he hadn't saved enough money for them? As they argued, Elena returned from where she had gone and began calling out, "Samuel, darling, where are you?" Immediately, Samuel heard Elena's voice. He dropped to his knees and begged Marianne not to expose him. He confessed that he had married Elena only for her money, and that they now had 3 children together. "Please, just pretend to be a maid. Don't let everything I built over the years fall apart," he pleaded. Marianne looked at Samuel and agreed to do as he asked. So, Samuel introduced Marianne to Elena, saying, "She will be our new maid. I saw her looking for work on the street, and immediately recognized her because we're from the same town. Please, let's welcome her and employ her as our maid." Elena, who completely trusted Samuel, welcomed Marianne and gave her the position. Marianne watched in pain as Elena kissed Samuel, her husband, and took him to their bedroom. But she could do nothing except endure it. In the weeks that followed, Marianne worked as a maid in her husband's house, pretending to be a stranger. However, every night, Samuel would sneak into Marianne's room to sleep with her, while Elena slept soundly in her own bed. This went on for several weeks until one day, while Marianne was preparing dinner, she fell asleep. When she woke up, the house was filled with smoke, and the food was badly burnt. Elena was furious and slapped Marianne in anger. "You're only here because my darling begged me to let you stay. If you make another stupid mistake, I'll send you back to the bush where you came from." Marianne was boiling inside. She wanted to lash out at Elena and tell her that Samuel belonged to her. But she remembered Samuel's plea and stayed silent. She was tired of the humiliation and pain she had endured under Elena. That night, Marianne went to her room and began packing her clothes. As she was packing, Samuel returned from work and entered her room. He was shocked to see her packing. "What are you doing? What's wrong?" he asked. "I've endured enough from you and your mistress. You're in charge of her finances. If you truly love me, then leave everything behind and come back to Den with me," Marianne replied. But Samuel couldn't leave Elena and his children. What had started as a plan had become a reality for him and Elena. He could buy and have anything he wanted now. Why would he give all that up and return to Den with Marianne to start over? "Please, give me 3 more years. Just 3 years, and we'll return to Democratic. I promise," Samuel pleaded. Before Samuel could finish, Marianne rushed to the bathroom and vomited. She washed her mouth and returned to Samuel, but she ran back to the bathroom and vomited again. This worried Samuel, so he took her to the hospital. "Congratulations, she's pregnant. The pregnancy is 3 months along. I recommend giving her plenty of rest as this is her first pregnancy," the doctor said. Samuel couldn't believe his ears. How could Marianne be pregnant? She had only been in Fiok for 3 months, and he had only started sleeping with her 2 months ago. Marianne instantly realized that Eric was the father of her baby and stayed silent. "How can you be pregnant? How can you be 3 months pregnant?" Samuel questioned her angrily. When they returned home, Samuel was furious. He began calling Marianne all sorts of names. "You're so ungrateful and wicked. I'm suffering here because of you. But you're shamelessly sleeping with every man in Dem." Marianne was deeply hurt and unfairly accused. She responded, "Ungrateful? You left me, your wife, for 6 good years. You stopped writing to me after the first 6 months. You stopped sending money. You married another woman and had beautiful children while I stayed in Dem, withering away like a flower. Yet, you call me ungrateful and wicked?" Samuel immediately realized his mistakes. He knew he was at fault, but his pride wouldn't let him apologize to Marianne. Worse, he let his ego make decisions for him. "I order you to leave my house, you ungrateful woman, and return to Democratic. I don't care about you anymore. I have a better life now. I don't need you anymore." But unbeknownst to Samuel, Elena hadn't gone to the office that day. As they argued, Elena stood behind the door and listened to every word. She discovered that Marianne wasn't who Samuel had presented her to be. She learned that Marianne was Samuel's wife and that every night, Samuel had been sneaking into her room to sleep with her right under her nose. This infuriated Elena. Elena felt betrayed and used. Immediately, Samuel opened the door and saw Elena standing there. He was shocked. Samuel knew he had been exposed. He fell to his knees, begging Elena for forgiveness. Elena pushed him away and went to hug Marianne tightly. "I am deeply sorry for everything you've had to go through, and I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. You don't have to leave. Stay if you can. I'll treat you better," Elena said. Marianne couldn't believe her ears. She looked at Elena in shock. Elena told Marianne that she didn't have to return to Democratic. "We've both been betrayed by this selfish man. It's not your fault. We both loved him to the extreme, but now I know better. We women must always look out for each other." Elena kicked Samuel out of her house and took back everything she had given him. All Samuel had left was a bag of clothes. He had never imagined that Elena would one day discover his secret, so he hadn't prepared for a day like this. The people of Fiok heard about what Samuel had done, and no one was willing to hire him. Samuel eventually returned to Dem and started his life over with nothing. He had lost 5 years of his life without achieving anything because he had been too greedy, ungrateful, and cunning. Marianne eventually returned to her village in Dem and apologized to her parents for not listening to them when they had warned her about Samuel. Her parents forgave her and welcomed her back as their daughter. Her mother explained that the reason she had been against Marianne's relationship with Samuel was that she had once caught Samuel with another woman on a particular evening. But she hadn't told Marianne because Marianne was so deeply in love with Samuel and wouldn't have believed her. Eric learned about Marianne's pregnancy and begged her for forgiveness. He proposed to her, and they got married a few years later. Elena remarried a man who truly loved her and accepted her children as his own. Meanwhile, Eric and Marianne lived happily ever after. As for Samuel, he struggled for the rest of his days, living in pain and regret.